Is this thing on?
Hi.
Hello?
Is this thing on?
Hi, is this thing on?
Is this thing on?
Is this thing on?
Hi, is this thing on?
Are we open?
Welcome to Open Ed Mike, a podcast where voices from across the educational landscape share insights, stories, and strategies for transforming learning through openness. Whether you're new to open education or a seasoned practitioner, Open Ed Mike invites you into the conversation. With that, let's see who's joining us today. Brittany?
Hi, I'm Brittany Dudek. I'm the Director of Library and OER Services at the Colorado Community College System, and I'm based in Denver.
Mike?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Mills, Associate Senior Vice President of Equitable Access and Student Success at Montgomery College in Montgomery County, Maryland, right outside the nation's capital.
And Zach?
Hi, everybody. I'm Zach Claybaugh. I am the Access and Reference Services Librarian at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois.
And I am Kevin Corcoran. I am from the University of Central Florida, located in sunny Orlando, Florida. So I'm very excited to have the four of us join and launch this inaugural podcast. The four of us have had this unique opportunity to share the stage a few times now as panelists and at different events. And we have to give a little bit of a nod to Julie Curtis from Pressbooks for pulling us together and having some conversations around inclusive access and open. Just acknowledging that we've had a little bit of time to spend together, I wanted to let our listeners know a little bit about each one of us and understand our why we are open education advocates. So, Brittany, can you kick us off?
Sure. So I think there's a lot of reasons why we all work in open. Maybe it's the pedagogy, or maybe it's the academic freedom that it brings to us. But it often boils down to the cost savings. And for me, that's kind of why I started working in this space. I was that student who couldn't afford their textbooks. I had to make choices on paying bills or paying tuition or helping my family. And that's a really hard spot to be in. And so I can really relate to our students. And I don't want to put students in that position if they don't need to be there. So when I first started working as an academic librarian back in 2011, I started adjuncting as well. So I was working full time and I was adjuncting because I needed to pay my student loans. And a lot of my students in Central Illinois were making minimum wage working in an LTA program. And I just couldn't bear the thought of them having to buy $150 textbooks while making a minimum wage working as paraprofessionals in libraries. And so I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know it was open, but I started replacing my textbooks in my special topics classes with library materials or free articles or journal articles that were from the library that I was working in. And so that's kind of how I got started. I know all the other benefits to open, but that's really why I do what I do, because I want to make sure that things are accessible for students. There's a really good relationship between libraries and open and access.
So you've had that student experience, you understand what the students are going through, but then you actually had the ability to execute within your own classroom. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Zach?
Yeah, so I guess in some ways I come to this from a similar direction as Brittany. I was a first-generation college student. My parents had no idea really about the costs and whatnot that were associated with, a university education. Didn't even have a whole lot of family friends that had attended college, so it was really kind of this black box. And I went to a small, regional state institution, and I remember registering for classes and having this list of books that I needed to go get. And I went to the bookstore, and, this was 1998, but it was still shocking and not something I had budgeted for. I had no real understanding of the need to have, hundreds of dollars set away for purchasing textbooks. Um, and, I was working a cash register and trying to pay for school. And, particularly before I eventually qualified for Pell Grants, it was a real struggle to not only pay for textbooks, but simply to pay for college. And I remember one year in particular, what I did is I would save up money. And then when I looked at what the readings were going to be for the course, and I would purchase the materials as they came up throughout the course.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember towards the end of one of my classes, I went to the bookstore to get the book, and they had pulled it from stock because they were getting everything ready for the next semester. And I ran all over town trying to find the book, and it wasn't anywhere. And that book was a significant part of the final paper that was due. And while I could get sort of the gist of it from class discussions and whatnot, I didn't have it. And I had done really well in the class up to that point. And then at that point, I had a poor grade. And, thankfully, the other grades in the class had, kept things at a high level. But it really, at that point, it hit me that, this was something that was going to be difficult for me to do every semester. And I managed to figure out ways to get around it and figure out ways to procure the items that didn't sometimes involve extensive costs, but it was a real struggle. So when I eventually started working in higher education, I was concerned with students that were first generation students that were coming in without that kind of knowledge, and that were getting, hit not only with the sticker shock associated with paying tuition and fees, but also textbooks and other like online homework programs and things like that. And it made it really challenging for a lot of students to have the materials that they needed to be successful in their courses. I was introduced to open educational materials, and I kind of ran with it. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I want students to be in a position where they can actually, what's the best way to put this? So when a student doesn't have the materials that they need to prepare for a class, they can't actually show what they can do. And I wanted to help students find ways to get that information or work with faculty members to change over that content to open, so those students would actually be able to show what they could do in that class without the impediment of not having those materials. So yeah, it's kind of a long-winded thing, but yeah, that's how I came around to open education and really why I'm passionate about it.
So it sounds like we have an emerging theme, shared student experience. And then once we're in higher ed, having the ability to remove barriers for students.
Absolutely.
Mike, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Thanks, Kevin. And as I listened to Brittany and Zach, it took me back to when I was a full-time faculty member teaching journalism back in the 1990s. And the mass media law class that I was teaching used a very expensive book for that time period. And I remember my students struggling with the cost of it. And so what I was doing was creating a lot of PowerPoint presentations to supplement and complement their material. But as I was presenting my own material, what I noticed from them was that they were not engaged at all in what I was talking about. It was all I saw were the tops of their heads because they were vigorously taking notes. And so one class period, I just stopped the presentation and I said, starting next week, I'm going to give you all of my material. I'm just going to give you my presentations because I can't come in here 3 days a week and just talk and not have any engagement. So I didn't even know what I was doing at the time, but it was my own form of open. And I said, I don't care what you do with them. I just expect you to come to class and engage in the conversation. And so when I got into higher ed administration and the whole open movement started in, the 2010s era, I remember doing a workshop on open education resources. And my very first workshop, I had 4 people, only one of whom is still engaged in the work. But when we talked about Merlot, for example, they just thought it was a wine. They had no idea what they were talking about or what I was talking about. And so we really started in earnest, or I started in earnest, a focus at that point. And I remember a few years ago having a conversation with a student, and I'm sitting down with the student. I'm having this administrator utopian view of open education resources, right? That you take these classes, you save this textbook money, you reinvest it in your education, you complete your degree faster. Life is good. And she looked at me and with as clear voice as she could, she said, "Mike, that sounds great, but I need this money to put food on the table.
Yeah.
I need this money to put gas in my car simply to get to work. Your view that it might help me graduate sooner, I love it. But the reality is life gets in the way and basic needs need to be met." And I think from my standpoint, while I have this utopian view that it does enhance their educational benefits, for many of our students, especially at the community college level, it's just to help ends meet on a daily basis. And so anything we can do to help that become a reality for them, I think is a win for everybody.
I think it was Hal Plotkin who had said, $20 is low cost if you have $20. If you don't, it's not low cost.
So true. Kevin, why do you work in open?
Well, I have maybe a combination of different factors. So I do have a student perspective to share. Back in the 1980s, I won't give you the year, I had a class, and the professor's name will remain a mystery, but he was the author of his own book. And it was a new edition, and it was fairly high priced for that time period. And then throughout the semester, I thought I was going to sell back the book to the bookstore and have, at least a sizable return on that. Well, during the semester, he made changes, and there was a new iteration coming out. So the bookstore wanted to give me pennies on the dollar. I think it was 75 cents is what they wanted to give me for the book. I may have or may not have done something childish with the book, but that is a whole other story for another point in time. Fast forward to the 2000s, I had an opportunity to actually meet Cable Green when he was still part of the Washington State Board for Community Colleges. And he was talking about this newfangled approach around open education and what have you. And we were having this initial conversation, and there wasn't a lot of takers. It wasn't until 3 years later when Cable was part of Creative Commons, and we were having a Northeast Summit. It was hosted at one of the schools at UMass, and Cable had refined his presentation, and it was a presentation that you wanted to run through a wall for Cable by the time you were done. And it was the right language to bring back to my constituents and get them to buy in with me. So, shared experience as a student and that whole cost shock. But I have to give a lot of credit to Cable Green and David Wiley for really inspiring me. The other connection I have is I've always been, a strong advocate around accessibility and universal design for learning. And I've always seen open ed as a branch off the UDL tree. And so just removing barriers for student success.
Do you all see your colleagues having similar stories as the four of us? Is that why they get into open, or is it because of the advocacy that you all have promoted?
I'll jump in and say I think it depends on at what point in time was the entry point to this conversation. So my younger colleagues who are in the open conversation have come in where open pedagogy has been introduced and solidified. The conversation is less focused on affordability and dollars saved and more focused on student outcomes. So I see a stark difference of folks that were, let's call it pre-2020 to post-2020 in the approach. I'm curious if others have had a similar experience.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely similar to you, Kevin. I can say that, I mean, I didn't really start jumping into open education until 2016. And for me and a couple of my colleagues at the institution I was at, it was this miraculous idea. And it was, I think, very much like Mike said, sort of that utopian idea of how can we best educate our students and, really help them succeed in college, not only on an affordability side, but also, like you said, Kevin, focusing in on things like universal design for learning and accessibility and all of the avenues that open education opened up towards that. But yeah, as time has gone on, there is definitely a stronger cohort that is really focused around, I guess you could say, those student success metrics, where a lot of us, I think, came into it from an affordability standpoint. I think there's a newer generation of advocates that are really focused in on open education as a way to improve a lot of the metrics around measuring student success, which can have, a real benefit to their own work, but can also serve the interests of the institution.
One of the big areas that we're seeing a lot of interest in with our instructors and our faculty is the area around like academic freedom, specifically being able to control the materials, all aspects, right? The updates, the accessibility aspect, being able to add in pieces or remove them, but really being able to control the material. And that's something that I didn't really see when I started working in open. And I'm seeing a lot more of now. It's kind of a marked shift, I think. And I'm fine with that. I think that it's a very real aspect of open, and it's a great reason to use it because it's, for our instructors who, specifically adjuncts, right, who may not be paid a certain wage, right, who may not have the time and bandwidth to update their classes constantly based on certain schedules. That's a fantastic reason to be using open.
We see that a lot too, Brittany. And what we're also seeing more of are students saying to their faculty members, why am I paying $300 for a textbook when my friend is in the same class, different section, and doesn't have to pay for that textbook?
Absolutely.
So I think that pressure that students are putting on the academy is also helping this shift. It's a fun time to be involved in it for sure.
Yeah, I think so too.
Mike, based on the question you asked us, I'm curious. You have an internationally recognized program out of Montgomery. You have one of your team members is an internationally recognized leader within Open Ped. How has the terrain or the involvement of your team changed over the last 10 plus years?
It's been more focused on engaging students in the community and allowing our faculty to understand that students can be co-creators of this content. And I think that's been a big shift for all of us, that it's no longer just this sage on the stage mentality, that the faculty, to Brittany's point, can adapt and change the material, but they can do it with students involved in that process.
I'd love to pull one common thread between, Mike, what you and Brittany both said around student influence or student need. And I wonder if everybody has had the same experience where you've had a faculty who've said, look, my job isn't to save students money. My job is to teach. And I select whatever the best resources are available that meet whatever the learning objectives are. And that's one argument. And then another argument that may extend from that is, and I've seen some of these students come in with brand new sneakers or an iPhone or what have you. Have you had to deal with that type of pushback from your faculty when you've been introducing an open ed initiative at your institutions?
One time in particular, I remember at an institution I was at that had a portion of its student population that was from, affluent backgrounds. And they would see BMWs and stuff like that in the parking lot. Students wearing really nice, expensive designer clothes and stuff like that. But they had developed this notion that all of the students within the institution were from that same economic background. And it took some doing to really get them to understand that we had a far more diverse student population, and a student population that was trending towards those that were coming from less affluent means. And that even though they thought that the materials that they were utilizing in their classroom were of high quality and would do a great job teaching these students, it was clear that not all students were purchasing the materials. And it became more of a conversation of, well, while you may feel that this is the best thing to teach these students, wouldn't it make a lot more sense to have something that they'll actually access? And it becomes sort of that pragmatic discussion about selection of materials and selecting materials that students can better afford or that students can receive for free, and actually accessing that content to prepare for class or to work through in class. So yeah, it's helping faculty members to better understand the demographics of your particular institution and not to look at just some single data points, and then also working with them to think in a more pragmatic fashion about how can I get my students to actually engage with the material that I'm assigning at all. And at least I think one of the best ways is to have it available for free, so they don't actually have to incur costs to access it.
Yeah, and Zach, you have an interesting perspective because you've been at two private institutions as well as a public R1. But Brittany, if I can, you're at a large community college system in Colorado.
Yes.
And I understanding that sometimes the framing, the narrative have to change, but I'm curious how you've dealt with faculty pushback.
I think that there's 2 points there. One is that every faculty member, every instructor, every discipline has a different opinion on what is the best material for students, right? And what is the best material to teach with. And if you get 5 instructors, faculty members in a room, they may have very different opinions on what the best material is. And so when they start engaging with each other and say, well, I like material X and I like material Y and I like W, they're going to debate, and I think that shows that maybe they should be open to other materials. And those may be publisher materials. Those may be different publisher materials, and it may be open materials. But I think that having those conversations with their peers who are using different materials is very helpful. The other aspect is, don't we all remember being young, in high school, in elementary school, in middle school, or in college? And
I don't know, Brittany. That was so long ago. I don't know if I remember it, but for sake of argument, yes.
For sake of argument, there's people in our lives who are young, right? And when all of your peers have the shoes or the purse or maybe the cool lipstick and you can't afford it, and all of a sudden you get a little bit of money and you're like, what am I going to buy? Am I going to buy the shoes or am I going to buy this textbook? We can all argue that education is an investment, right? And we obviously see the importance of it. But if I'm going to deal with not feeling comfortable around my peers, or can I get by for another few weeks without my textbook? There's a chance that I'm going to choose something that's going to make me feel more comfortable around my peers. And I think that that's something that we can all relate to, regardless of what our experience was when we were growing up. In Colorado, I serve 13 colleges. I work at a system office. I have students in the rural areas. I have students in the metro areas. And at every single college, we have a different demographic makeup. We have a different socioeconomic makeup. And we're really focusing lately on the power of 13 and these different consortiums where instead of only serving the students who enroll at my one college with my same demographic makeup that I've had for the last 15 years, my students who are enrolling in my classes now are students from all over the state and from all 13 colleges. And that's a growing area that our instructors, our faculty, our administration are working through right now, where everything is changing and I need to rethink the way that I'm teaching. I need to rethink my student population. So it's something that we're working through, but I think those conversations with our peers are really helping. But I'm not above mentioning, do you remember when you were 22 and you wanted to take someone out on a date? Do you remember when you were 17 and your peers would make fun of you for having the wrong jeans? So
we have our students during Open Education Week go through an exercise where they can put sticky notes on a poster board. If you didn't have to spend money on textbooks, what would you spend the money on? And to Brittany's point, it is often those things that make them comfortable around their peers: video games, shoes, new car, whatever the case may be. So I think there's a lot to be said for that.
And don't we all go out for dinner sometimes when maybe we should have put a little bit of money in our savings account or something? I mean, I do.
I remember during a legislative testimony, a student from the student government at the institution that Zach was at previously, who, in response to this question, said, you are questioning my investment in an iPhone. An iPhone is something that is going to be with me 3 to 5 years, has a multitude of uses, is my personal communication, is my professional communication, has all of these different functionalities and apps, versus your textbook, which is only good for 3 months and is a single-use piece.
Love that.
You can't make the argument that these are the same investment. And the same thing can be said for a new pair of sneakers.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Is really powerful. Yeah.
Well, and I hope our listeners are enjoying this and getting to feel that, we have folks that, from a system out in Colorado. We have somebody who has access or experience in a private and in a large public R1. And then, somebody who's in the shadow of DC and has a variety of challenges and opportunities. So I want to ask, or take this moment to ask folks, what's your perspective on why we came together? Why is this podcast important right now? Why did we decide that this was a good idea and that folks are going to tune in on a regular basis to listen to us and our guests? Anyone interested in taking a first stab?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Kevin, and I think it's exactly how you preface the question. The four of us come from different backgrounds. We come from different experiences. We come from different institutions, different locations. And so do our listeners. They're spread around the country. In some cases, they may be international. And so I think everything is relatable, right? There are no pretenses here. We all struggle with higher ed at the moment. But I think one of the things that we should all be able to agree on is that no one should be denied a higher ed education because they cannot afford a textbook. Like
Absolutely.
that shouldn't be the barrier that says you can't go to college. So I think that's why this podcast will resonate with a lot of people.
Excellent.
I also really love the opportunity, I'm in all these different groups and committees and work groups and all of that. And there's so many different touch points to open that may be very obvious and clear and also may not be so obvious and clear. And I think that we all have those different voices that it's time to start elevating. And I'm really excited to start bringing in those different voices over the next, months, years, if we're so lucky, to have some of these interesting conversations where we all get to learn something here in this group and listeners. I'm excited about it.
Zach.
Yeah, no, I think that we're in a really challenging moment for higher education. I feel like we're, in a space where open can make some more headway. I have a lot of the same feelings as Brittany and Mike. But I think that, we're at this challenging moment where I think open education can really spread its wings a little bit more. And I love the idea of being able to, number one, just chat with you guys about open education, which I really enjoy doing, but also hopefully, help people to better connect with the opportunities that are available and figuring out, new ways where they can deliver value for their students in their institutions. And particularly with the guests that we have lined up, I think that we're going to come at this with a wide diversity of, feelings and motivations and strategies for, approaching open education in different, campus environments. And that's exciting.
Well, I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to say that one of the reasons why I'm excited about this is that I get to spend time with three people I highly respect talking about open education. And I will also tease that we have some incredible speakers lined up over the next couple of episodes and beyond. What I'd like to do is transition. If you had the opportunity to see the logo for this podcast or hear the opening, clearly we're trying to pull an open mic night vibe that you might see from a comedy club. And as with most open mic routines, there are jokes and comedians that just don't hit. And so we're going to try to match that vibe. And I was going to say earlier that perhaps Cal State and Merlot missed an opportunity to have wine and OER, but I digress. But since AI is so prevalent in all of our conversations and there's AI opportunities to engage and open, we thought we might use AI to generate some really bad dad-mom jokes. And so I'm going to ask maybe Zach and Mike to do a 2-for-1 special this month.
Oh, no.
Go ahead, Zach. I'll let you go first.
Okay. So, just to kick us off with our first awful joke, why did the textbook get kicked out of the Open Education Conference?
Oh, jeez.
Because it refused to share its cover charges.
Oh, no.
Well, let me give it a shot. And we're in the throes of summer. All of us have people coming to visit, or we're going to visit people on vacations. So this one is, why are open education resources like bad house guests? They never leave and everyone can use them without asking.
That was
That was really
too.
bad, right? Yeah.
We're just setting expectations for the next episodes. And so, if you, listeners, just so you know, this is where we're going from now on. I want to thank Brittany and Mike and Zach for joining. And with that, I'm going to say the mic's closed and we'll catch you next month. Thanks all. Take care.